I want you to picture something for a second. You are walking into the lobby of like a massive Fortune 500 company headquarters. You know the exact vibe I'm talking
Oh,
about.
yeah. The whole brushed steel, cold glass, echoing floors kind of thing.
Exactly. Everything is glass, brushed steel, and these incredibly sharp 90-degree angles. You walk past the security desk, you look at the quarterly projections flashing on a monitor on the wall, and it's just all straight lines. Straight lines going up and to the right.
Right. The classic corporate trajectory.
Yeah. And the entire corporate ethos, I mean, the CEO, the board, they all point to that Euclidean perfection and say, there it is. That's rationality. That is human progress. And it feels controlled, it feels really clean.
Well, it's the ultimate illusion of mastery over the environment. Total, uncompromising predictability, or at least the aesthetic of it.
Right, but then you step outside that lobby, you walk down to the coastal highway, you look at the concrete overpass that was built maybe, I don't know, 30 years ago, and chunks of it are literally falling off.
Yeah, crumbling into the ocean.
Exactly. The steel rebar inside is expanding with rust, shattering the pillars from the inside out. But then you look past the highway and you see a simple morning glory vine lashing itself to a chain link fence. And it's not growing in a straight line at all.
No, of course not.
It's wrapping itself in this perfect ascending mathematical helix. It's adapting, it's thriving, while the multi-million-dollar concrete overpass is literally turning to dust in a single generation. And you realize that straight line on the corporate spreadsheet, it's fundamentally broken. We are looking at a modern institutional landscape that is just collapsing under its own weight.
Because what you're describing is the absolute definition of structural fatigue. It is a complete failure of form. And it's happening precisely because we've confused bureaucratic neatness with actual resilience.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you are a man who looks around and feels that our modern institutions are just fundamentally broken, that they have been stripped of their original purpose, flattened by endless layers of bureaucracy, and made actively hostile to the builders, the fathers, and the craftsmen of the world, then this is exactly where you need to be.
It's the conversation nobody really wants to have out loud.
Right. Today, we are exploring a highly provocative, intensely debated new ebook. It's called Automorphosis, Repeating Shapes Across Nature and Creation by Conrad Riker. And Riker is bringing this massive structural argument to the table. He basically argues that our societal collapse isn't just, bad policy.
No, it's much deeper than that for him.
He says it is a direct result of abandoning the natural geometric laws of masculine stewardship and replacing them with this feminized bureaucratic flattening that destroys everything it touches.
And he doesn't just make this as some cheap political claim. I mean, he traces this framework through thermodynamics, evolutionary biology, historical architecture, and the actual literal physics of decay.
It is wild. We are going to get super deep into the weeds on this, but before we pull this entire worldview apart, I need to ask you, yes, you listening right now, to do something really important. Like and subscribe to this channel.
Highly recommend it.
Yeah, this is how you keep your intellectual immune system sharp against the noise. And I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, if you are part of this audience, if you are seeing those cracks in the foundation we just talked about, you need to check out Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy Automorphosis right now. You're also going to want to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for real-time analysis of current events through this exact lens of natural law.
Now, before we go a single step further, I need to lay down a crucial tone-setting caveat for this deep dive. Because Automorphosis explicitly critiques feminism, Marxism, DEI, and progressive politics, and because it is frankly written directly for a red-pilled men's rights activist audience, we have to clarify our boundaries here. We are not taking any political sides today, neither left nor right.
Completely neutral. We are explorers here, not evangelists.
Precisely. We are not endorsing Conrad Riker's viewpoints, nor are we condemning them. Our mandate today is strictly to impartially report on the contents of the book, to dissect the underlying arguments, and to convey the fascinating and obviously highly controversial ideas contained in this original source material.
Right. We want you, the listener, to understand the architecture of Riker's worldview so you can evaluate his framework totally for yourself.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start at the absolute foundation. Riker opens with a premise that really shakes up how we perceive the physical world. He claims that nature operates on objective geometry. Like, it isn't random. Spirals, hexagons, fractals, these are the baseline. And he argues that human institutions only survive when they mimic these exact same shapes.
Yeah, and to build this argument, he leans really heavily on a 1917 masterwork by a Scottish mathematical biologist named Darcy Wentworth Thompson. The book is called On Growth and Form.
Which is a classic, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Now, to understand why Thompson was so revolutionary, you have to look at what biology was mostly doing in 1917. It was basically taxonomy, cataloging species, noticing what looked similar, pinning butterflies to boards, and tying it all to Darwinian evolution.
Very observational.
Right. But Thompson comes along and says, wait a minute, biology isn't just genetics, it's physics. He argued that biological shape is not arbitrary. A nautilus shell or a ram's horn isn't just nature deciding to be artistic or random. Those shapes are, in his exact words, diagrams of forces.
Hold on, unpack that phrase for me.
Yeah.
Diagrams of forces. What does that actually mean in practice?
It means the shape is the literal mathematical solution to a physical problem. Let's take the logarithmic spiral, which is a massive focus for Riker early in the book. The mathematical equation for a logarithmic spiral is r equals a times e to the power of b theta.
Okay, you just lost me with the algebra. Give me explain like I'm a 5, a version of what that math is actually doing.
Fair enough. Imagine you are a nautilus, a marine mollusk living inside a shell. You are a living organism, which means you are constantly growing. You are accumulating mass. But you live inside this rigid calcium carbonate shell. Now, if you grow in a straight line, you become this long, vulnerable tube that will easily snap in the ocean currents.
Like a weird, fragile pipe.
Exactly. But if you grow out like a balloon, you become too buoyant, and you literally can't dive. So what is the geometric solution? How do you grow endlessly, but never change your center of gravity or your fundamental proportions?
You spiral.
You spiral logarithmically.
Yeah.
The nautilus pumps water out of its chambers and deposits calcium carbonate in this ever-expanding curve. As it gets bigger, the radius increases exponentially relative to the angle. That's what the math means.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's an algorithm for growth under constraint. It gives the organism maximum volume, uses the minimum amount of material, and maintains constant structural integrity. The shape isn't a stylistic choice at all. It is the physical manifestation of an optimized solution.
And Riker takes this biological math and points it like a laser at modern society. He contrasts this natural logarithmic spiral with the way modern bureaucracies operate. He basically argues that the straight line, the Euclidean line you see on an HR spreadsheet, is actually the geometry of death.
It is entirely unnatural.
Right. He compares a straight line to a corpse falling off a ledge. It's this demand that the complex, messy physical world just submit to the convenience of a desk-bound administrator.
Because a straight line assumes friction doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It assumes a vacuum. Riker argues that the modern managerial state runs on this Euclidean hubris. It believes it can just issue a top-down, rigid mandate, and reality will obediently conform.
Which it never does.
Never. Nature doesn't accumulate in straight lines, it rotates. It spirals, it branches into fractals. Fractals and spirals are bottom-up, recursive, and incredibly resilient to damage.
Let me test this framework really quick. If I'm a guy managing a team of contractors or, a father running a household, what does this actually mean for me? Let's try an analogy. It sounds to me like the difference between trying to build a massive brick wall versus planting an oak tree.
Walk me through that.
Well, a brick wall is a top-down hierarchy, right? It's a straight line. You stack the bricks perfectly, but it's incredibly brittle. If the ground shifts underneath it by even a half an inch, the whole wall cracks.
It has no capacity to adapt.
Exactly. It can't adapt. It requires you, the central planner, to constantly intervene, patch the mortar, prop it up. But a tree is a fractal.
It distributes its structural logic.
Yes. The tree doesn't have a central command center micromanaging every single leaf. The trunk splits into branches, the branches split into twigs, the twigs split into leaves. If it encounters a boulder in the soil, the roots just map their way around it. It takes the rough, chaotic terrain as a given.
Right. It doesn't fight the terrain, it navigates it.
The tree distributes the algorithm of its growth outward. And according to Riker, that is how classical masculine generative force works. It operates radially outward from a fixed point. A father, or a leader, sets the core algorithm, the rules, the purpose, the axioms of the household, and then he trusts his sons or his team to execute that algorithm in their own unique contexts, adapting to the terrain.
That's a perfect distillation of Riker's point, actually. And he takes it a step further by connecting this geometric reality to philosophy, specifically to the classical transcendentals. The one, the true, the good, the beautiful, and the just. He subjects this entire geometric framework to a transcendental audit.
How does a mathematical shape map onto something like the good or the beautiful? I mean, those sound like entirely subjective categories to most modern ears.
Well, this is where Riker pushes back hard against modern subjectivism. Consider the fractal or the logarithmic spiral again. The one is the single unified pattern repeating across both the micro and macro scales, like the same shape governs a DNA nucleotide in a spiral galaxy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then the true is the mathematical progression itself. It is predictable, testable, and utterly unforgiving of deviation. The good is the optimal utilization of resources, the Nautilus wasting 0 calcium carbonate. And this is the crux of his argument regarding the beautiful. Riker insists that beauty is not in the eye of the beholder. It is not an emotional reaction or a social construct.
So what is it then?
It's functional truth. The sunflower seed head packs its seeds using the Fibonacci sequence. It doesn't do this to look pretty to humans. It does it because it is the most mathematically dense packing arrangement physically possible.
It's pure optimization.
Exactly. It solves a structural problem so completely, so flawlessly, that no other solution remains. Efficiency, when pushed to its absolute physical limit, inevitably manifests as elegance.
That is heavy. If nature runs on this uncompromising mathematical code, this algorithmic discipline, then it stands to reason that our own bodies must be the ultimate proof of it, which transitions us perfectly into how Riker looks at human biology and the sexes.
Yeah, he centers this argument around the work of Alan Turing. Now, when I say Alan Turing, what immediately comes to mind for you?
Cracking the Enigma code in World War II, early computers, the imitation game, all that stuff.
Right. Turing is universally known as the father of theoretical computer science. But in 1952, he published a paper called The Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis. Morphogenesis is simply the biological process that causes an organism to develop its shape. Riker uses Turing's paper to assert something profound. Life doesn't just resemble computation, it runs on literal, physical computation.
So we're not using computation as a cute metaphor here.
No, not at all. We are talking about enzymatic proofreads, telomere countdowns, epigenetic toggles.
Okay, pause. Time out for translation. I haven't opened a biology textbook in over a decade. You just threw epigenetic toggles and telomeric countdowns at me? Explain how a biological cell is acting like my MacBook.
Okay, think of DNA as the hard drive containing the code. Epigenetics are chemical markers like methyl groups that attach to the DNA. They act as literal binary switches. They toggle genes on or off depending on environmental feedback, just like logic gates in a microchip.
All right, so physical switches.
Exactly. Then you have telomeres. Those are the caps at the ends of your chromosomes. Every time a cell divides, the telomere gets slightly shorter. It is a literal biological countdown clock, an integrated timer that tells the cell when to undergo apoptosis, which is programmed cell death before its code degrades into cancer. The cell reads the code, checks for errors using specialized enzymes, and folds proteins into three-dimensional shapes based entirely on that data. It is a physical validation mechanism.
So it's literally hardware computing. And here's where Riker drops what I think is the most controversial part of the book. He points out this massive structural asymmetry in how male and female biology handles this computation.
It is a profound, irreconcilable dichotomy in the hardware itself. To illustrate this, Riker cites a landmark 2012 study published in Nature by Kong et al., which tracked de novo mutations, meaning new genetic mutations passed from parent to child. The mechanism of reproduction between the sexes is radically different. After puberty, a man's sperm undergoes roughly 23 cell divisions every single year.
Meaning the cells are constantly copying and dividing endlessly year after year.
Yes. By the time a man is 40, his germline, the cells passing on his genetics, has undergone hundreds and hundreds of replication cycles.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate here. If the male system is just constantly churning and copying, and every single one of those cell divisions is a chance for a transcription error, doesn't that make the male system incredibly inefficient? I mean, why wouldn't nature prefer a safer, high-fidelity system across the board?
Because nature needs a brute force search algorithm.
A search algorithm.
Yes. The male reproductive system acts as a biological probe. By churning out genetic variants by the billion and accepting roughly 1 to 2 new mutations every year compounding across a lifetime, the male system is taking massive risks. It accepts incredibly high error rates as the necessary cost of exploration.
So it's basically throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Exactly. It's throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what mutations might allow the next generation to survive a new disease or a changing climate. It probes the unknown.
But the female biological system operates in the exact opposite manner.
Entirely. Female oocytes' egg cells complete roughly 23 cell divisions total, and they do this entirely in utero before the woman is even born. Then those cells arrest in a state called the prophase of meiosis.
ELI5, that prophase part. What does arrested mean in this context?
It means the cells pause their division process completely. They lock themselves in a biochemical vault. They don't divide again until ovulation, which could be decades later. It is a highly curated, low-throughput, intensely conservative archive. The female system runs on conservation, protection, and absolute fidelity. It preserves the proven code.
So, to put this back into software terms, according to Raker's reading of this biology, men are the chaotic, constant beta testing branch of the human code. They are out there taking the genetic risks, running the errors, testing the extreme boundaries of the environment.
Right.
And women are the stable, protected master branch of the repository. They are the curated archive that ensures the species doesn't corrupt its core operating system. And Riker uses this to argue that biological rules, men as the disposable risk takers and women as the protected center, aren't social constructs invented by a patriarchy at all. He argues they are evolutionary hardware requirements.
And he brings in an absolutely brutal piece of evidence to back this up. It's a 1999 study by Peter Sadowski regarding mitochondrial DNA.
Right, the powerhouse of the cell. We all learn in high school that you inherit your mitochondria exclusively from your mother. But they never explain why that is.
Exactly. Why doesn't the father contribute? Sadowski demonstrated the literal mechanism for this. The father's sperm has mitochondria in the tail to power its journey. But those male mitochondria arrive at fertilization tagged with a specific protein called ubiquitin.
Ubiquitin, which is essentially a molecular death warrant.
Literally. Ubiquitin is a marker that tells the cell's waste disposal system, destroy this. Within hours of fertilization, the male mitochondria are systematically hunted down and dismantled by the newly formed embryo.
Hunted down?
Yes, the male contribution to the mitochondrial lineage is violently eliminated. Why? Because the female line operates as the high-fidelity archive optimized for stability across generations. The male line, with its high mutation rate and beta testing chaos, does not get a vote in the core energy system of the cell. Two inheritance systems, two irreconcilable priorities hard-coded into our chemistry.
Wow, nature is ruthless. It doesn't care about our modern sensibilities of equality, it just cares about survival. And if biology is this unyielding machine of maintenance and highly specific, unchangeable roles, Riker argues that the physical world of engineering offers an even starter proof of what happens when men stop maintaining those roles, which pivots us from biology directly into the physics of decay.
Yes, and this is fascinating. Here, Riker unpacks the second law of thermodynamics. Formulated by Rudolf Clausius around 1850, it is the foundational rule of the physical universe. It states that in an isolated system, entropy always increases.
Entropy being the measure of disorder, right?
Exactly. Disorder is the default state of the universe. Heat dissipates, iron rusts, mountains erode, things fall apart.
But Riker introduces a concept he calls entropy's lie. He says that modern intellectuals and bureaucrats basically use the second law of thermodynamics to create this massive philosophical deception.
The lie goes exactly like this. Because entropy eventually wins in the terminal heat death of the universe, all human order, whether it's a border, a hierarchy, or a family structure, is just a temporary, arbitrary social construct. It's a nihilistic excuse preferred by weak men who would rather drift comfortably into decay than take on the agonizing burden of building.
They would just surrender to it.
Right. But Riker argues that life, and specifically human civilization, is the heroic local defeat of entropy.
And he uses this incredible experiment from 1900 to prove it, the Bernard cell. I had never heard of this before reading the book, but it perfectly visualizes what he's talking about.
It's a classic physics demonstration. You take a very thin layer of oil in a wide, flat copper pan, and you heat it from below. At low heat, the fluid dynamics are just chaos, Brownian noise. The molecules are jittering randomly, bumping into each other. It's a state of high entropy.
But then you turn up the heat.
Right. When you increase the temperature gradient past a specific critical threshold, something miraculous happens. The chaos instantly snaps into a perfect, visible honeycomb of hexagonal convection cells. The oil organizes itself.
Wait, why a hexagon? Why not squares or triangles?
Because nature is solving a math problem. These are called dissipative structures, a term coined by Ilya Prigogine decades later. The system is under massive energy stress from the heat. Instead of declining into total chaos or boiling over randomly, the matter self-organizes into functional geometry. It maintains its internal order by dumping the excess entropy of the heat into its environment as efficiently as possible. And the hexagon is mathematically the most efficient shape to move heat through a fluid layer. The universe uses energy flow to carve temporary islands of perfect form out of disorder.
So Translating this to Riker's broader point, human civilization is one of those temporary islands of form. We are a dissipative structure fighting off chaos. But his argument is that we've completely forgotten how to build forms that last. He makes this brutal, highly specific comparison between Roman engineering and modern construction.
It's a very grounding example. He cites a 2019 report from the American Concrete Institute regarding modern parking structures and highway overpasses. Modern concrete relies on steel rebar inside of it for tensile strength.
Tensile strength meaning the ability to bend without snapping.
Correct. Putting steel inside concrete allows developers to build faster, create thinner slabs, and span wider gaps. It maximizes immediate profit and efficiency, but it guarantees planned obsolescence.
Because of the rust.
Exactly. Concrete is porous. Over time, chloride ions from road salt and rainwater penetrate the concrete. The steel rebar oxidizes, and as steel rusts, it expands up to 4 times its original volume. This incredible pressure spalls or shatters the concrete from the inside out. The report notes that these structures require major interventions in 25 years and total replacement in 50 years.
50 years? That is a single human lifetime. Meanwhile, Riker points to the Pantheon in Rome. It was built on compression geometry. It uses massive, heavy shapes pushing against each other. There is no tension-bearing steel hidden inside to betray it. It has stood for nearly 1,900 years with zero structural intervention. The Romans built for their descendants until the end of time. Modern developers build structures designed to rot before their own grandchildren are even born.
One architectural mindset assumes the heavy, multi-generational responsibilities of a father. The other mindset operates entirely on the short-term appetites of a consumer.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where Riker applies this exact concept of maintenance to the modern male. He talks about the maintaining man as the mole. Think about the guy working in the dark. He's checking the tire pressure on the family car. He's testing the smoke alarms. He's caulking the windows, shoring up the foundations no one ever looks at. His labor is the invisible, unglamorous glue holding the structure of society together against the forces of entropy.
But modern culture openly mocks this man. We treat him like a boring relic.
A total joke in the sitcoms.
Yeah. Instead, society worships Silicon Valley disruption. Progressive politics chases the dopamine hit of the revolutionary moment, smashing the old systems to usher in the new utopia. But Riker argues that true civilization is not a disruption engine. It is a maintenance cult. The highest form of love is the grueling, daily preservation of the good.
He argues that a culture that values disruption over maintenance is fundamentally a culture of deadbeat dads. It's a society obsessed with the excitement and passion of conception, but completely allergic to the decades-long daily burden of actually raising the child.
That is exactly his framing.
But this forces a massive question. If this structural wisdom is so obvious and so historically enduring, if the math of the universe literally demands that we build like the Romans and act like the maintaining mole, how did our modern institutions become so incredibly fragile? How did they become so openly hostile to the builders?
That leads us directly into the core critique of Riker's book, The Bureaucratic Distortion. Riker outlines the systematic capture of our institutions by HR departments, DEI initiatives, and a sprawling managerial class that, in his view, produces absolutely nothing of physical value, but strictly enforces ideological compliance.
And he doesn't just complain about this like an angry guy on a podcast. He uses 2 devastating sociological laws to explain the exact mechanism of how this takeover happened. This isn't a conspiracy theory, Tim. It's an inevitable structural rot.
The first law he invokes is Parkinson's Law of Triviality, which is also known as bike shedding. This was formulated in 1957 by C. Northcote Parkinson. Parkinson observed a fascinating pathology in human organizations. They spent disproportionate amounts of time and energy on trivial, universally understandable issues, while completely neglecting complex, high-impact problems.
The Nuclear Reactor Committee. Break down this example for us because it is painfully accurate.
So, Parkinson imagined a committee tasked with approving the plans for a massive, multi-million-dollar nuclear power plant. The committee sits down, looks at the incredibly complex reactor design, and spends exactly 2 minutes on it.
2 minutes on a nuclear reactor.
Right. Why? Because the engineering is too complex for the bureaucrats to understand. They stay silent so they don't look ignorant. The reactor gets approved with basically zero oversight. But then, the committee moves to the next item on the agenda, the staff bicycle shed.
And all hell breaks loose. I've been in these meetings.
Exactly. They spend 45 minutes intensely debating the color of the bike shed, the material of the roof, the placement of the racks. Why? Because everyone can have an opinion on a bike shed. Everyone understands paint colors. So power and attention migrate rapidly to the comprehensible. The highly competent nuclear engineer is sidelined, and the loudest bureaucrat controls the agenda.
It's like a parasite eating the host. The people who actually know how to build the reactor are suppressed by the people who know how to run meetings. And the second sociological law he brings in is Michal's Iron Law of Oligarchy from 1911.
Yes, Robert Michaels was a sociologist who studied political parties, and he demonstrated that all complex institutions, regardless of how democratic or noble their founding purpose, eventually come to serve their own preservation rather than their stated mission.
So the mission just gets lost.
Entirely. The DMV doesn't exist to issue licenses efficiently. It exists to employ DMV workers and expand its budget. Universities no longer exist to educate scholars. They exist to fund exponentially growing administrative salaries.
Institutional self-preservation completely replaces the original purpose. The structure stops serving the mission and starts serving itself. And to illustrate the difference between the builder who solves problems and the bureaucrat who creates them, Riker uses a really striking metaphor. He asks the reader to picture two objects side by side. On the left, a ball-peen hammer. The hickory handle is worn smooth from 10,000 swings.
And what does the hammer represent in his framework?
Riker says it represents verifiable physical mastery. The physical universe offers no great inflation rate. If you are a bad welder, your seam cracks under pressure. If you are a bad framer, the house leans. The hammer proves that you have successfully negotiated with reality. But on the right side, Riker places a framed Bachelor of Arts in Communications.
The parchment is crisp, perfectly clean, totally unblemished by physical sweat.
Exactly, and Riker argues that the degree represents nothing but compliance with the bureaucratic narrative. The bureaucratic class has systematically redefined the very concept of achievement. It's no longer the demonstration of physical competence, it is the successful completion of paperwork.
And this redefinition leads to what Riker calls the fallacy of flatness. He takes aim at postmodernism, which he argues demands a flat ontology. In a flat ontology, all roles, all competencies, and all structures are deemed entirely equal, and any form of hierarchy is viewed as inherently oppressive.
But here's the thing, and I'll use an analogy here, flattening a structure destroys it. You can't navigate a globe by pretending it's a pancake. It's like trying to build a commercial airplane using consensus instead of engineering.
That wouldn't go well.
Right. You can put everyone in a room and take a democratic vote on whether the wings should be made of cardboard to save money and promote equality, but the law of gravity does not care about your vote.
Precisely. By demanding flatness in the name of equity, society destroys the vital transmission belt of civilization. Master to apprentice, senior to junior, father to son. When you replace strict competence hierarchies with demographic quotas or consensus models, you eventually discover that your bridges no longer hold weight, your power grids fail during winter storms, and your software collapses under minimal stress.
Riker points to Bell Labs during its mid-century prime as the ultimate counterexample. Bell Labs invented the transistor, information theory, the laser. They essentially built the modern world. And Riker argues they do it because they operated on a strict, completely transparent hierarchy of extreme technical competence.
They weren't voting on physics.
No. Supervisors were master craftsmen who earned their absolute authority through decades of documented physical achievement. They weren't promoted by consensus. They weren't promoted for having the correct therapeutic effect or passing a DEI audit.
Because the universe does not renegotiate its structural laws to accommodate activist demands. When you eliminate a hierarchy of competence, you don't get equality. That's the illusion. What you actually get is a massive power vacuum, which is immediately filled by the most manipulative, cunning bureaucrats.
And here is where Riker's argument cuts deepest for his target audience. He argues that this systemic dismantling of hierarchy doesn't just happen at work in the corporate office. He says the bureaucratic state has deliberately targeted the most fundamental, load-bearing structural unit of civilization itself, the family.
This takes us directly into the core of his critique on the feminist and Marxist capture of the household. And again, as a reminder to you, the listener, we are maintaining our absolute neutrality here. We are exploring Riker's specific framework and how he articulates this collapse to his readers.
Right, these are Riker's claims. We're just mapping them out. And to make them, he goes all the way back to antiquity. He looks at the Roman concept of the paterfamilias, the father of the family, and the lorarium.
The lorarium was the physical household shrine. At dawn, the Roman father would stand before it, offering grain and wine to the ancestors and the household gods. Riker points out that modern historians mostly dismiss this as mere superstition or sentimentality, but Riker says it was highly practical structural maintenance.
Maintenance again.
Yes. It bound 3 generations, the ancestors, the living, and the unborn, into a single, unbreakable unit. The historical household was not just a place to sleep after work, it was a sovereign production unit. It generated competent citizens, it created surplus wealth, and it preserved cultural memory.
But today, Riker argues, the household has been completely hollowed out. It's been reduced to a mere consumption pod where individuals stream content and wait for Amazon deliveries. And he lists specific historical dominoes that caused this collapse. The first domino he points to is 1852 in Massachusetts, with the institution of compulsory schooling. He frames this as the first time the state successfully outsourced education, essentially deciding that bureaucratic administrators knew better than fathers how to form the minds of citizens.
And the second massive domino he identifies is 1969 in California, when Governor Ronald Reagan signed no-fault divorce into law. From Riker's perspective, this legislation fundamentally altered the geometry of the family. It turned marriage from a permanent load-bearing covenant into a unilaterally dissolvable contract, optimizing the system for asset extraction with minimal accountability.
And the final domino in his framework is the modern family court system. Riker claims these courts have effectively turned fathers into ATMs. His argument is that men are burdened with the immense financial obligations to fund the children, but are stripped of all legal authority over how those children are actually formed, disciplined, or raised.
This dynamic is what Riker terms the theft of structure and the gravity error. He argues that classical patriarchy, which modern progressives obviously view entirely as an oppressive crime, was actually a physical, balanced contract. Authority perfectly matched the burden.
Explain that balance.
So the man receives sovereignty and authority over his household precisely because he bore the axial load of its survival. He would work himself to exhaustion providing for it, and he was expected to literally die defending it.
And Riker points out that the burden part of that equation hasn't changed at all. He pulls the statistics. Men still make up 92.3% of workplace fatalities. Society still universally expects the man to protect, to provide, and to absorb the lethal physical risks of maintaining infrastructure.
But the authority is gone.
Exactly. Simultaneously, cultural narratives like her body, her choice, and the relentless campaigns against toxic masculinity strip away all the commensurate authority that used to accompany that massive burden. And Riker delivers this incredibly sharp line. He says that burden without authority isn't equality, it is slavery.
In his view, the cultural narrative happily extracts the physical labor, the destroyed joints, and the financial provision from the male, but dismisses the worker himself as either unfairly privileged or inherently tyrannical.
And what happens when you remove the father? What happens when you outsource his algorithmic role to the bureaucratic state? Riker says it objectively, measurably fails, and he brings the receipts to back it up. He looks at the foster care system. According to the Chapin Hall Midwest study, roughly 41% of former foster youth experience homelessness by age 26.
That is a staggering number.
It is. Riker asks the question, why? Why does the state fail so miserably with basically infinite resources? Because a caseworker with a clipboard and a government pension simply cannot manufacture paternal investment from a spreadsheet. The bureaucrat lacks skin in the game.
Contrast that state failure with his data on homeschooling. According to the National Home Education Research Institute, homeschoolers consistently score 15 to 30 percentile points above their public school peers on standardized tests. They exhibit drastically lower behavioral problems and report much stronger family bonds. Riker uses this to prove that the geometry of the sovereign household consistently, effortlessly outperforms institutional provision.
But if homeschooling works so well, why do educational bureaucracies constantly harass and try to regulate homeschooling families? Riker's answer is chilling. He says the state doesn't compete on outcomes, it competes on jurisdiction. No bureaucracy ever willingly surrenders its territory, even if it is completely failing the children within it.
Which brings us to the final, and I think most crucial section of our deep dive, chapter 16 of the book, The Emperor's Blueprint. Riker isn't just diagnosing the rot, he is actually offering a way out. If the institutions are fully captured and the culture is actively hostile, how do men reclaim their stewardship? To answer this, he points to a brilliant historical example, the Roman Emperor Justinian in 529 AD.
This part of the book is a masterclass in seeing the hidden architecture of history. Riker shows how Justinian solved two massive, seemingly entirely unrelated problems using the exact same structural logic.
Let's start architecturally. Justinian dispatched a team to build the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. The engineering challenge was historically immense. How do you put a massive, incredibly heavy circular dome on top of a square room without the walls just collapsing outward? The solution his engineers devised was the pendentive.
ELI5, the pendentive. Visuals are tough on a podcast, but try to paint the picture.
Imagine a curved triangle of stone vaulting. It fills the upper corners of a square room, rising and curving inward to create a circular base at the top. It reconciles the geometry of a circle with the geometry of a square, taking the massive crushing weight of the dome and transferring it safely and cleanly down through the corners of the supporting walls.
So it redirects the pressure.
Exactly. It turns gravity from a destructive force into a stabilizing force.
Okay, so that's architecture. But at the exact same time, Justinian is solving a legal crisis.
Yes. The Roman legal system at the time was a disaster. It was centuries of contradictory, chaotic legal opinions, decrees, and archaic laws. Justinian dispatched his jurists into the libraries to compile what became known as the Digest, part of the massive corpus juris civilis. Their job was to take all that chaos and reconcile it into a single, load-bearing, authoritative text.
And Riker argues that building the Hagia Sophia and writing the Digest are the exact same achievement.
Structurally, yes, they absolutely are. Both achievements take abstract principles, whether it's the physics of gravity and proportion or the ideals of justice and equity, and translate them into concrete, load-bearing forms that persist across generations. The Digest is jurisprudence's answer to the pendentive. Both transfer immense weight and authority down through consistent precedent, and crucially, both demand transmission unchanged, or the structure fails. If you suddenly decide to edit the core legal principles of the Digest just to match the fashionable opinions of the day, justice collapses into the arbitrary will of whoever currently holds power. Just like if you remove a pendentive, the dome falls.
It's all about valuing inheritance over innovation. It's preserving what works. Riker points out that Charlemagne understood this deeply in 800 AD. When Charlemagne built his Palatine Chapel in Aachen, he didn't hire architects to disrupt the industry or express their personal creativity. He directly, meticulously copied the exact geometry of the Church of San Vitale in Ravenna, which had been built centuries earlier. He knew the grammar worked, so he preserved it.
Riker actually ties this medieval architectural mindset directly to modern economics. He cites a 1990 study by the Nobel-winning economist Douglas North. North demonstrated that societies that maintain foundational axioms like the English common law tradition, which relies on precedent massively and consistently, outperform societies that constantly rewrite their code laws from scratch by committee every time there's a revolution. The secret to civilization is preserving the core axioms while permitting new theorems to be built on top of them.
So, synthesizing all of this biology, physics, and history, what is Riker's ultimate blueprint for his readers today? What is the practical takeaway for the guy listening to this right now? It's highly specific. First, he says, reclaim education. Pull your kids out of the state system, homeschool them, or build classical co-ops. Second, reclaim production. Start household businesses, teach your kids physical vocational skills, and make your home a center of actual creation, not just an Amazon consumption pod. And finally, he urges men to draft a written family constitution.
He insists on a physical document, too. A constitution that tests the family's rules directly against those transcendentals we talked about.
Yeah.
It gives the family a permanent, articulated identity that goes beyond mere biology. It serves the ancestors and it binds those not yet born. Because, as Riker beautifully writes at the end of the book, the forces of noise are loud, but they do not have the forms.
These forces of noise are loud, but they do not have the forms. That is an incredibly powerful distillation of the whole book.
It perfectly summarizes his thesis. The bureaucratic state may have the HR departments, the media platforms, and the university endowments, but they don't possess the geometry of order. They're a temporary dissipative structure that has stopped dissipating entropy. Their institutions were built to dismantle, to critique, and to flatten, not to construct.
So, what does this all mean? We started this deep dive looking at a modern corporate office building, all glass and straight lines and HR-compliant spreadsheets, and we compared it to the spiraling morning glory vine and the rusting, failing guardrails of our infrastructure. If Riker's framework is right, if the universe truly speaks in uncompromising mathematical shapes, if the Nautilus shell and the Hagia Sophia and a well-ordered sovereign family all share the exact same geometric blueprint, then the ultimate act of rebellion today isn't smashing the system.
No, it's not destructive at all.
Right. It isn't yelling at a protest, it isn't voting harder, and it certainly isn't posting angry comments online. The ultimate, most dangerous rebellion a man can undertake is simply becoming a master craftsman of his own life. It is choosing to build a structure, a household, a legacy that is so tightly aligned with the permanent laws of nature that it outlasts the noise.
You align your life with the undeniable geometry of gravity, and you simply wait. You let the bureaucracies crush themselves under the weight of their own manufactured entropy.
Exactly. Before we sign off, I need to remind you to like and subscribe to this deep dive. If this breakdown resonated with you, if you feel the friction of a world that prizes bureaucratic compliance over physical competence, you really need to get the full blueprint.
We highly encourage you to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Automorphosis by Conrad Riker. The sheer depth of his historical, biological, and scientific analysis goes far beyond what we could cover here today.
Absolutely. And don't stop with the book. You need to subscribe to the author's Substack at Conrad Marker. Follow him on Twitter and YouTube. Join the movement of men who are looking at the collapse clearly, without fear, and choosing to build something permanent in the ruins.
Because the shapes repeat for a reason. They repeat because they are real.
And the cracks are watching. Next time you walk into a building or look at a spreadsheet, ask yourself, is this a diagram of forces or a diagram of illusions? We'll see you on the next deep dive.